The Seabird Trust was established in 2015 with the objectives of promoting seabird conservation, research and education. And as I remember it, there were three main motivations for the establishment of the Trust. The first was that we had an opportunity to secure funding for research on the New Zealand storm petrel, and while that might seem a mercenary motivation, it also made us realise that there was a gap, there was a role for an organisation such as the Trust to exist. Secondly, there was a profound lack of basic ecological research on seabirds in northern New Zealand, and we were keen to address that and facilitate that sort of research. And thirdly, there was a growing appreciation on the importance of the Hauraki Gulf and northern New Zealand, and especially the Pestary Islands, for the protection of seabirds, not just in New Zealand, but throughout the world. In our first year, we had revenue of approximately $35,000. This year, we've increased that something like sixfold, and that's due very largely to the support of organisations such as Foundation North and the Gift Fund, the Department of Conservation, the Auckland Council, Birds New Zealand, De Geer Trust, J.S. Watson Trust and the Chisholm Whitney Family Trust, and I'm very grateful for their support and for their continuing support for the Trust. The value of our projects, however, is far greater than that, and it's magnified by our partnerships through the University of Auckland, Auckland War Memorial Museum, the Auckland Council, AUT and Unitec, and of course the incredible amount of work that is put in by volunteers and students in assisting with our projects and with our various operations. The talks at today's seminar, I think, fit really well with those three primary motivations, and will also feature talks from projects that the Trust is not directly involved with, and I'm especially grateful to those individuals and groups that have come to share their knowledge and experience with us. On behalf of us all, I'd like to thank the Maritime Museum for providing the facility, and in particular the Zen Papapetros and her incredible amount of effort in putting this show together and running the program. And of course also to Chris Gaskin from the Trust, who will feature several times on the program and who is also responsible for organising all the speakers and much of the background as well. The Seabird Trust has a commitment to conducting and supporting research that is not just about ecology. We also want projects that contribute to the conservation of the species we're working with and that also lend themselves to public awareness and education. Today's seminar is a testament to that commitment, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to share these projects with you. Chris Gaskin, I'm going to call on him for the first and not for the last time at all, and he's going to provide an overview of seabirds of northern New Zealand and some of their interesting and defining features. Thank you.
Play with trying to get the mic up. Yep. How's that? I've also been playing with the lights and just let us know if things are getting hot in here, and we can adjust temperature and so on. I have to admit that, I'll speak into the mic. This is an introduction to seabirds of northern Aotearoa, New Zealand. And this presentation will cover, well, what is a seabird? Our place in the seabird world, well, we believe it's tops by far. Our region, explain, what we're covering. An overview of northern seabird species, and then characteristics that define a seabird. In other words, setting up the day. This is not a seabird. I'm sure it's seen the sea, it's a coastal bird. It's so excited, but it's not a seabird. This is a seabird. And so is this black petrel. Well, seabirds, how special are they? Well, let's start with some numbers, global size numbers. There are some 11,000 birds worldwide. And of those, only 370 are seabird species. Now, you know, a world that's 70% ocean, that to me is an extraordinary number. Now, of those 370 species, 37 or 87 species breed here in New Zealand. Of those, 37 are endemic species. They breed nowhere else in the world. Now, the next country with endemic species has 5, that's Mexico, the British territories, and so on. So we're way out in terms of, way out in front in terms of endemic species. And Aotearoa really is a global hotspot for them. If we look at globally threatened species, and this map further confirms our place in the world of seabirds, the data used here is from tracking birds either foraging during breeding or on migration. So we not only have the highest number of endemic species, but we also have the highest number of threatened species as well. A great responsibility. So that's the global picture, but let's put that in context. Northern New Zealand encompasses New Zealand's subtropical north from East Cape to across to Taranaki, north to the far north, beyond Cape Reinga, and up to the Kermadec Islands. And that's the area, that's our region. You know. So northern seabird species, we've got 41 breeding here in the north. Of those, we have 1 penguin, 1 albatross. Yes, we have 1 albatross on the 3 kings. 20 petrel species in petrels and shearwaters, 2 gannets and boobies, 1 tropic bird, 5 shags, 3 gulls, and 8 terns and noddies. Now, 17 of those species or subspecies only breed in New Zealand, making northern New Zealand, or northern North Island even, region, one of the richest endemic seabird breeding places in the world. If we come in closer to home and we look at birds that are endemic to the wider Hauraki Gulf region, and when I talk about the Hauraki Gulf, I include the Poor Knights, I include that strip of coastline up to the Bay of Islands, because, and you know, that encompasses the Poor Knights, the Hen and Chicken Islands, Tauranga and Maratiri Islands. So if you look at that region and across to the Coromandel as well, fairy tern, well, arguably our rarest bird, probably one of the rarest birds in the world, if not the rarest. 35 individuals, thereabouts. New Zealand storm petrel, we're going to hear about this a little bit later on, above 1,000 individuals. Black petrels, I hope these figures are okay. Pie-crossed petrel, and Rako, the Buller's shearwater. And again, we'll present some information about our population survey on that. And other seabird species that have significant populations in the northern New Zealand, well, northern little shearwater, flesh-footed shearwaters, Cook's petrels. I mean, 98% of the world's population breeds on Aotearoa, little barrier. Oi, grey-faced petrels, that's a northern species. Little penguins, very significant populations, and even the pied shags. But it's not only the birds breeding in the region, it's also species visiting the region. So you've got 22 regular visiting species, and you can see the makeup of that number. 24 rare visiting species. Particularly if you go out beyond along the continental shelf edge, you'll see a good number of albatrosses, a whole suite of albatrosses sitting out there beyond the outer Hauraki Gulf. And then you have 26 vagrants. That's a total of 72 species. Now, it's likely that there are more, that the more we look, the more we find. So, characteristics that define a seabird. Well, they feed on marine species. Fish, krill, squid. They can drink salt water. In fact, a lot of the birds have glands just above the eye here, and that allows them to drink salt water, excrete the salt, and refresh themselves. They float on salt water, on seawater. They spend a lot of time preening, looking after their plumage. They have oil glands above the tail, which they wipe their bill across and then move across their feathers to make them perfectly waterproof. You might have to shift this back to the other one. Colonial nesting is normal. That can be above ground, like with the gannets or boobies or tropic birds, but it's also underground as well. So the picture in the middle is of from the poor nights of buller shearwaters or raiko in burrows under the trees. And in life history, well, they have small clutches. With the petrels, it's only one chick. With gannets and penguins and so on, they can have more. Delayed maturity, they don't start breeding until, could be a few years. Finding food at sea. Well, to find food at sea, they don't have any spectacular, fantastic technology. They have to use their senses. So multiple sensors come into play. And one of those, particularly with the tube-nosed birds or the petrels and shearwaters and storm petrels and so on, smell is vitally important. Allows them to detect the presence of potential prey. They have extraordinary vision, both in air but also underwater. They want to keep an eye on what's going on below. They can dive deep. In other words, they can fly. Not only can they fly through the air, but they can also fly through the water. And we'll see a little bit of video later on about this. They have the ability to fly and forage over large areas of the ocean. This is oi, or grey-faced petrel, which forage. You won't see them feeding within the Hauraki Gulf during the day. They're out beyond the shelf edge, and that's where you'll find them. Well, some seabirds are better at flying than others. These little guys, this is a diving petrel, fits in the palm of your hand, just a little ball of muscle. For penguins, well, obviously they don't fly. So they have very localized foraging and dispersal. They remain resident within the Hauraki Gulf throughout the year. Now, what we're talking about are birds that breed, and they breed at different times of the year. But when they finish breeding, some, like the penguins, remain local. Others, like fluttering shearwaters, for the most part, remain resident within the Hauraki Gulf through the year. So when they finish breeding, they molt locally. Some will go across to Australia. Grey-faced petrels, some of them will move to Australia. But others start making some extraordinary journeys. The three down the bottom, these are very prime diving petrel, little shearwaters. They breed sort of winter through to spring, so they finish breeding in sort of December, January. Those birds, because it's still summer down here, head south. We now know that the diving petrels attract diving petrels and little shearwaters, and we know that they're going right down to the South Polar front, down towards Antarctica, and feed up, and then they come back at the end of summer. Fairy prions, well, we just got the results of the first tracking of this species, and we're finding that they're going out to the subtropical convergence, which is out more or less in the central part of the South Pacific. But others are making bigger journeys. Black petrels are heading off to Ecuador. Now that's a big bird, and they cover that distance pretty quickly. The little guys, the little white-faced storm petrels, bounce their way across, and they head off to the east coast of, or the South American seaboard, around the Galapagos and further south. But then there's a suite of birds that head north. So they're sort of finishing breeding April, May, and they're off up into the northern hemisphere, basically following the summer. So you've got flesh-footed shearwaters, black-winged petrels, pie-crossed petrels, Cook's petrels, sooty shearwaters, making these journeys to the north. Then, of course, they have to make that return journey. They feed up in the northern hemisphere and then make that journey. This is tracking from sooty shearwaters. You can see that down the bottom, during breeding, they're feeding down towards the South Polar front. When they finish breeding, they head across towards South America and then head north, east of Japan there, and then they do a sort of figure-8 journey either around Hawaii or the Californian current. That photograph there is taken in Monterey Bay of sooty shearwaters, but it's feeding up before they return across the equator to New Zealand. And basically this is setting up our next presentation because these are birds returning to their colonies. Okay, thank you.